about this idea, and then went to see Mike Dukakis and see if he had some interest, and went over to the business school and talked with John Quelch and see if he had some interest, and we had the foursome, and we started the Boston Global Forum. I think we probably are over 30 conferences by now in that period of time, and through all of this, our guiding light and main contributor has been Tuan, and Tuan is the glue that holds this organization together, that makes it run, our CEO. And people like me would just kind of show up every 3-4 months or so. So, Tuan, thank you so much. Well, Mike would normally come to the podium at this point and give you welcoming greetings. He happens to be at the hospital at the moment for a foot problem. He hopes to be home by 5 and to be with us virtually at that point. So you're going to have to suffer me for the next 2 hours or so until we can get Mike back in the swing of things. But I want to start by with one of our World Leader Awards, which has become a tradition of the Boston Global Forum. And this year's recipient of the Boston Global Forum's World Leader in AI World Society is Amandeep Gill, the UN Secretary General's Envoy on Technology. Amandeep Gill joined the India Foreign Service in 1992, serving with distinction in Iran, Sri Lanka, and Switzerland, before being appointed head of the Disarmament and International Security Affairs Division of India's Foreign Ministry in 2013. 4 years later, he was appointed India's ambassador and permanent representative to the Conference on Disarmament in Geneva. In 2017, Ambassador Gill helped establish India's National Task Force on International Artificial Intelligence and subsequently contributed to the drafting of UNESCO's AI ethics guidelines. His entry into the UN came as executive director of the Secretariat of the UN Secretary General's high-level panel on digital cooperation, which led to his appointment as envoy. Upon naming him as envoy, the UN described Ambassador Gill as a thought leader on digital technology, who brings to the position a deep knowledge of digital technologies, coupled with a solid understanding of how to leverage the digital transformation responsibly and inclusively for progress on the Sustainable Development Goals. He has brought to the position insights he has gained as the project director and CEO of the International Digital Health and AI Research Collaborative based at the Graduate Institute of International and Development Studies in Geneva. That initiative seeks to promote responsible AI research and accountable use of digital technology. Ambassador Gill holds a bachelor's degree in electronics and electrical communications, an advanced diploma in French history and language, and a PhD in nuclear learning in multilateral forums from King's College, London. Ambassador Gill embodies the commitment to the responsible use of AI and digital technology that has defined the Boston Global Forum's work. It gives me great pleasure to be honoring him today with the World Society Award. Ambassador Gill. Or just choreograph.
Thank you very much for honoring me today, Professor Patterson, dear Tuan, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to be here at Harvard to spend some time with you and talk about digital technologies and the issues that these technologies pose for our societies, our economies, and our political systems, whether national or international. I'm deeply honored by this award, which I think should rightfully go to all those who are toiling away in our academic institutions, in multi-stakeholder forums, in multinational forums, to get a better understanding of the impact of these technologies across the three pillars of the UN: peace and security, human rights, and of course, development, and are working together, often unacknowledged, often in obscurity, to reinforce international cooperation around these technologies. Powerful technologies have been around for a while. We have, in the 20th century, dealt with the power of fission and fusion, often in not very successful ways. We've dealt with space technologies. We've dealt with very powerful technologies coming from the biological domain. And therefore, digital technologies are no exception to that struggle. What is perhaps different is that these technologies are coming more and more from the private sector. Their development has not been shaped as much by government intervention, by public institutions, as has been the case with other powerful technologies. The other thing that we must keep in mind when we talk about digital technologies is the way in which they cross borders. They have border impact like no other technology does. So a small app in a remote location, if it is the right kind of moment, the right kind of user interface, can scale to global proportions in no time. An incident anywhere through social media platforms, through other digital means, can impact the consciousness of billions around the world. So that's what's different about these technologies. And when it comes to artificial intelligence, and we have some experts in the room, what's different is not that we are dealing with something that's beyond the current paradigm of computer science, of dealing with information in zeros and ones, but it's just a different way of putting data, outcomes, and code together. So imagine in the past, we use a code with data to get to some outputs. But with artificial intelligence, it's the outcome that comes together with data to determine the code, which becomes a model, which can then interact with new data sets to come up with insights. So it's an interesting reversal of the earlier paradigm, at least with the current generation of artificial intelligence technologies. And this is where the power lies. You can deal with data sets that are simply impossible for humans to deal with. So if you look at financial transactions in today's markets, the speed, the volume, and the sheer variety of data that's out there, it's impossible for either humans or traditional computing systems to handle. So you have to rely on artificial intelligence. So that's the source of their power. And we've seen this power demonstrated first in the marketplace. Companies such as Google and Meta look at our data across a variety of devices, across a variety of platforms, are able to get insights from that and place ads or other proposals before us that demand our attention, demand our action, and entire business models with huge market capitalization have been created on that basis. The power of these technologies is seeping into other domains. Lethal autonomous weapons systems, where AI comes in to help select targets, to go through petabytes of data, whether it's coming from video feeds, from drones or something else, or a multitude of sensors in the battle space, can then help the war planners decide which targets to engage and how. So when conflict is taking place at warp speed, when you have a battlefield that is confusing to say the least, and when you don't have the kind of connectivity that you are used to in from the battlefields of the past, then AI steps in. AI steps in to select targets, sometimes engage them, and God forbid, to take autonomous decisions about life and death, an issue that the UN Secretary General is very, very concerned about and staked a position on quite early on, that we should not allow machines to take decisions on their own to take life away. Humans should remain accountable, should remain responsible for those decisions, and the application of international humanitarian law, international human rights law should not be occulted just because machines, we've delegated some of these functions to machines. So I just gave you a few examples to illustrate the power of AI. The potential of these technologies for good is there. We see challenges today, such as the climate change challenge, the green transition from a take, make, and waste economy to a circular economy. All these challenges cannot be handled without data, without artificial intelligence, and other emerging technologies. So what do we need to get to a place where we can get a handle on the risks, where we can prevent the misuse, but at the same time maximize the opportunities for good, maximize the potential of these technologies to contribute to the international community's sustainable development goals, those 17 goals, from zero hunger and no poverty, all the way to conserving our global commons. I think the first thing we need to do is to make sure that the opportunity space is democratized. Today, you have close to 3 billion people who are not connected to the internet. And even those who are connected often cannot afford connectivity in a meaningful way. They connect through devices which give them only a narrow window onto the digital world. The content that's available to them is not in their languages. It's not meaningful enough. It's not empowering enough. When it comes to data, those who are left out of the data economy are the ones who are contributing data. They are not being able to benefit from data. And when it comes to AI and its application at the junction of digital and other sciences, you see the divide in even more stark terms. So all of Africa contributes less than 1% to patents and research publications on digital health and AI in health. And within Africa, a single country contributes 75% of that. So this is the extent of the divide at the data and AI end when it comes to some countries. And mind you, this is not limited to the developing countries alone. Even in richer countries, you see many countries getting left behind of the data and AI revolution. So the digital divide is not only about internet connectivity, it extends all the way to data and AI. And if we are not mindful about it today, if you don't address it today, you'll have a yawning gap between the haves and the have-nots in the future. So few people would design the algorithms, would use data from the masses in a sense to maximize value for themselves. And this is not just a morally untenable position, it's also practically dangerous. So if you don't have diversity in terms of data sets, in terms of contributions to our digital future, we are likely going to be running more risks than we should. Just take the gender divide issue. If today we have certain problems in the tech domain, just imagine if there had been more women designing digital technologies 20 years back, then would we have seen the same kind of business models today? I doubt very much. So lack of diversity is a practical risk for us as well. It's not just a moral question. The other thing that we need to get right, if we want to maximize the opportunity and minimize the misuse, is governance. We have a live example today, the collapse of the FTX empire, the crypto exchange. So when three regulators coming from three different domains are asked what they were doing, and the answer is an awkward silence, because this thing actually fell between three stools. And you cannot just say that, you know, these are offshore companies, the law of the land doesn't extend there. If the law of one of the most powerful countries on the planet cannot extend to these business models, you can imagine what might be happening elsewhere. So at the national level, we have this ambiguity. We have the pace of technology, this famous pacing problem between tech and policy, where regulators are using 19th century tools or 20th century mindsets to deal with some of these issues that are struggling. And at the international level, just as these things fall between stools in the national domain, internationally they just fall at the borders, because we are not used to cooperating on digital technologies. And increasingly, there is a nationalist turn on these technologies, from supply chains to manufacturing chips. And it's not just an East-West issue. Even within the West, you see competition between the EU and the US, and within, sometimes even within Europe. So there is a degree of beggar thy neighbors, nationalist positions, and that is preventing international cooperation on the governance of these technologies. And then in terms of our mindsets, what we lack today is life cycle approaches to these technologies, because you simply cannot regulate at one point and say, I will now sit back and just deal with some compliance issues. Because what you see is data coming out of certain contexts, contributing to the AI models, the AI models then coming out with certain outcomes in that particular context, and what is developed inside a sandbox when it scales and is taken to the society at large or the marketplace at large, sometimes has a different impact than what it had in the sandbox. So unless you have a life cycle approach, unless you look all the way from the context to the data, training data, to the AI systems, and to their impact, you cannot handle their implications. So some geographies, some market regulators are looking at these issues. For instance, they are looking at smart regulation that combines a competition policy and consumer protection to deal with these issues. They are looking at getting together with the industry and getting together with civil society and academia to have more of a jointed approach. But this is something that is very patchy at this point in time, needs to be done in a more coordinated manner. Otherwise, we will lose the trust of the public of these technologies. And without trust, we will not be able to scale. We will not be able to have the kind of digital transformation that we wish for. I like to end my remarks, and I think we have an interactive session planned. So I'd like to end my remarks by speaking a little bit about a process that has started at the United Nations. A few years back, Secretary General Antonio Guterres, who has a deep interest in technology, he actually is a former student of this domain. He started a discussion around digital cooperation. He felt that there was insufficient cooperation across domains. Sometimes the tech issue is just discussed by technologists. We don't have enough social scientists in the room, ethicists, designers, artists, poets, people with a different perspective. At the end of the day, it's humans we are speaking about, so it's not just code. And he also felt that there was insufficient cooperation across borders. So he started a discussion on digital cooperation. And that discussion is now moving into a digital commons discussion. That just as we've had these commons in the past, the maritime domain, the seas that have been regulated, either customary international law or instruments such as the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, or we have the outer space domain, where outer space is supposed to be the province of all mankind, and there are specific conventions that regulate how you send astronauts up in space, how you recover objects that fall to Earth. So just like those old commons, the digital domain itself can be treated as a commons. And just as we had the tragedy of the commons in the past, we have a tragedy of the commons today with digital. There are pirates and buccaneers who take advantage of lax governance, who indulge in ransomware, exploitation of children on the dark web, and many other abuses. And therefore, we need guardrails. We need certain rules of the road for these commons. And just like in the past, some of these commons were turned into private clubs. So they're not truly commons available to the community. We face a similar problem today with the digital domain of exclusion, of not enough of a democratic opportunity for everyone. So we need common rails, we need guardrails for the digital commons as well. And the Secretary General has called for a summit of the future in 2024, at which one of the 6 key topics would be the digital commons. And a proposal has been made for a global digital compact, a kind of charter, if you will, that brings us together, that helps us address this problem of things falling between stools or things stopping at borders, and not enough coordination, not enough alignment on approaches to digital technologies across borders. The General Assembly, the member states of the United Nations, have come together to approve that proposal, and a process has just started under the leadership of the President of the General Assembly, who, in a sense, embodies the combined will of the member states. And the PGA, as he is called, has appointed 2 co-facilitators, ambassadors and permanent representatives of Sweden and Rwanda, to lead that process. And my office has been entrusted with supporting them on this nearly two-year journey to the Global Digital Compact. A very important aspect of this journey is that it's a multi-stakeholder journey. even though these discussions will come to a conclusion at the Summit of the Future, which is an intergovernmental process, the digital domain is multi-stakeholder. So private sector, academia, civil society, the tech community have to contribute and have to be also part of the implementation of the Global Digital Compact. It's not enough for governments alone to agree on this and then apply it in their own practice. This has to be landed in the practice of the private sector as well. There is a consultation phase that we have just embarked on, and these consultations have to be diverse, have to be inclusive. I was in Malta recently where nearly 100 people, different ages, different backgrounds came together for a very interesting, very insightful conversation. I'll be in Addis Ababa next week, where we will do more consultation on the African continent. We'll continue to Nairobi, where again, you see these innovative, new and emerging geographies of innovation in Africa, Asia, and Latin America, and they have to be part of the conversation. Civil society partners have come together to run their own consultation processes with the disabled, with women, with LGBTQ communities and others who often don't get a voice when it comes to these intergovernmental negotiations. So I'd like to invite you today to take some interest in this and contribute to this process. Host your own consultations if you can. Work with us, partner with us, so that we leave no voice behind, so that we can work together for an open, free, secure, and inclusive digital future for all. I thank you very much.
So before we move on with the rest of the program, if you have a question for Ambassador Gill, let's take 5-10 minutes and have some responses to his remarks. Please.
Thank you for the inspiring comments. I recently had a conversation, an in-depth conversation with Bernardo Mariano Jr., who was the Chief Information and Technology Officer of the UN. And he was describing some of the things you just discussed. One of the issues that came up is the fact that so many different nations and different parts of the world have very differing levels of maturity where it comes to technology, infrastructure, data, and so forth. And he mentioned that the UN, its great power is the convening power. So my question is, how do you manage these getting people together when you have these vast differences?
Yeah, that's a task that we do on a routine basis in different domains: climate change, disarmament, peace, and security. In the digital domain, for instance, the proposed agenda for the Global Digital Compact is diverse enough that it can interest countries at all levels of maturity on the digital transformation. Frankly, even those which have very low levels of internet connectivity, sometimes in the 30s or the 40s comes a percentage, are very, very interested in moving along on e-commerce, on developing the digital economy, on creating their own data sets, on digitizing government services, digitizing land records, for instance, for more efficient land markets. So I guess there is something in it for everyone. And the various forums inside the UN are making an effort to address the needs and demands of countries at different levels of maturity. And I see the Global Digital Compact as an opportunity to also create a larger tent in a sense. Often some of these discussions have been very narrow in scope. And the compact is an opportunity to bring together everyone and have continued conversations on the governance of these technologies and on ways to maximize the digital transformations, leveraging power for sustainable development.
Thank you.
Hi, Joan Donovan from the Shorenstein Center. I'm very interested in thinking about this problem at scale. Do you see any potential conflicts or maybe governance on the horizon that is capable of auditing, tracking, monitoring any of this big data AI technology? And I say that because the issues that we have tend to be that these companies do not disclose the very dangerous aspects of these technologies. And I wonder how we're going to do governance if we can't do oversight in a very robust and independent way.
Right. I think that's a very, very important question. And again, we have to be mindful that we don't transpose models of governance from the previous era. For instance, in the nuclear domain, you have the International Atomic Energy Agency. There are inspectors. They can come and check seals on the cameras, the records of production, etc. That's not going to happen in the digital domain. People are not going to let you pore over their code and look at some things that could have proprietary aspects and so on. So what's the way around? How do we avoid this kind of a black box approach, and we just let the companies decide for themselves what's good and what's problematic? I think we have to start with a set of shared principles at the international level. They have to be firmly based in human rights, in human agency, in fundamental freedoms, in human choice. They have to be anchored in the sustainable development goals. So this is technology with purpose, technology with a heart, human-centered approach to technology. And then these principles have to guide how national regulation happens. And national regulation is where you would have the teeth, in a sense, that can force companies to adopt certain practices and not take certain approaches. And then at the final level, at the third tier, you have the industry practices themselves. There are perhaps some areas where neither international guidance nor national regulatory approach will suffice. For instance, the design of these technologies, where there is a lot of ambiguity, where the regulatory authorities may not have an insight or may not actually have legal jurisdiction or authority. And there we have to rely on codes of conduct, on ethical approaches, on the way engineers are trained. I've been trained as an engineer, and there is a certain mindset that unfortunately, even today at the best campuses, I've seen it, that mindset still exists. Tech is neutral. So, I've heard this in this country at the best computer science schools. No names, but that's still. So you need to address that problem in education, in training, in how companies themselves organize the entire R&D, design, development, testing cycle. And there are good examples. There are companies, not necessarily in the data business, but in other kind of digital business models, where you have this constant reflection, where you have certain like records of problems. So you're supposed to have them recorded. And then your point about audits, these are perhaps internal audits. And you see now a trend towards oversight boards. I don't know how much of that is, ethics washing, how much of that is real. Again, no names. But I think we need to have a discussion about what are the design principles for those oversight boards. How do we ensure that these boards have authority, that they can, call out certain things and stop certain things? And then when it comes to emerging technologies, and my favorite example is the so-called metaverse. How do we make sure that of the $100 billion that are going to be invested, just taking a number here, again, no one is implicated here. So is there a certain percentage that's going to go in from the beginning in terms of research on the societal implications, on human rights aspects, on governance? Are we going to see more transdisciplinarity in thinking about these technologies, so that this is not just a discussion about interoperability across various metaverses? So those are the kind of issues that we need to have a very, very serious discussion on now to avoid the kind of scenario that you've described so well.
So, can everybody hear me? Building on your question, excellent, and your wonderful presentation as well as remarks on the previous question, I do want to point out this is AI is an area of unprecedented complexity and importance for the humankind, as well as other life on Earth. And for that reason, AI, even if it's not talked about or considered as a public good at this point, you mentioned the commons, I think it would be great to at some point have for the UN to lead a more democratic, more transparent, multinational dialogue among the haves and have-nots, facilitate this dialogue so that we have charter principles and the code of conduct, use of AI in for the common good. So I think these are the thoughts that immediately come to one's mind. And I think I'll stop there because this is something we can talk about for weeks on it. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love this question because, we were talking about the International Atomic Energy Agency. That's not the model, but there's another model. That's the CERN. In fundamental physics, this is a collaboration where scientists first from across Europe, now many other countries, came together. Countries pooled resources, built these experiments together. No single country, no single institution could do that. And as my dear friend Gary Marcus has called for, we need a CERN for AI. We need a distributed CERN, not in one job. CERN is a very nice model, but it comes from a certain period in time. It's about certain technologies. Now, digital is different, so we need a distributed CERN, which is also in line with the kind of emerging geography of innovation that you see today. Vietnam, India, Indonesia, South Africa, other places. There are brilliant computer scientists. There are great use cases, whether it's genomics or climate change resilient agriculture. So you need to build a distributed infrastructure, data sets that come together for the greater good. The private sector will do its thing. It'll make loads of money. It'll come up with very interesting innovations, products, and services. But as with the powerful technologies of the past, we need public institutions to also come together, make investment, so that we can, in a sense, bend the direction away from risks and misuse towards the common good. So it's not just writing the rules or exhorting people to do things, coming up with nice documents, etc. It's also go ahead and do some things yourself. Come together, do certain things, build some things that make an impact. Otherwise, the metaverse is going to be about, lots of money, maybe lots of porn, but who's going to think about climate change resilient agriculture if there's no money there? So you need to make that effort on the data commons, on the AI commons. And there is now, post-COVID, there is greater interest in digital public infrastructure, in digital public goods. Otherwise, how could you administer 2 billion plus vaccines in a country the size of India in a certain number of months if it had not been for the CoWIN platform, which itself is a combination of several digital steps from the past 10, 12 years. So countries have woken up to this opportunity, this possibility. I think internationally also we need to come together. The circular economy, e-commerce packaging, a very simple example. If there is collaboration on the life cycle data of packaging, then we can have innovation around what kind of packaging would be good for the planet. For that, you need to have that international collaborative approach, those kind of comments. Thank you very much.
So now I have 4 speakers. These are in many ways kind of follow-ups to the ambassador's speech. I don't think you want to see me jumping up and down here between every speaker, so I'll introduce the 4 and they can come in order. So first we'll hear from Cameron Carey, who's the former acting Secretary of Commerce. Following Cam will be Asli Chukri from MIT. Then we have Zlatko Dubijev, who's the former Prime Minister of Bosnia and Herzegovina. And finally, Francesco Lapenta from John Cabot University in Rome. So we'll start with you, Cam.
Well, thank you very much, and it's a pleasure to be here in person. I'm, at a significant moment, I think, when it comes to international cooperation discussions. We are meeting, of course, on the heels of COP27 gathering in Sharm el-Sheikh to deal with climate change. We're meeting opposite the other largest gathering in the globe, the FIFA World Cup going on now. And really, when it comes to digital affairs at an important moment, the world, I think, has been transformed in the past year by a war in Europe that many of us thought unimaginable. And that, I think, in many respects has brought home some of the stakes in how we deal with the digital world as well. And Ambassador Gill has, I think, laid out very much the challenges and the opportunities, and ended in a place where I want to pick up on some of the mechanisms of cooperation. But I do want to comment on something that the ambassador said that resonates with me, and that was about how we train and build capacity among engineers. I have, in addition to my affiliation at the Brookings Institution and affiliated with another institution in Cambridge, where teaching ethics related to technology, to data, to AI, is something that individual professors deal with, but not something that is systematically a part of the curriculum. I mean, that is very much true of computer science, engineering, AI, data science, generally. I'm trained as a lawyer. We did have ethics training as part of my professional education. Doctors take a Hippocratic oath. And why shouldn't there be some equivalent in science and technology and engineering, especially as when you consider that in this day and age, when we're dealing with AI and its impacts, almost all research is human subject research, which of course requires an ethics board approval. That thinking, that process, I think needs to be incorporated into the training of engineers. I want to talk a little bit about how we implement cooperation. So since leaving the Obama administration in 2013, I've been affiliated with the Brookings Institution in Washington, where I am a distinguished visiting fellow. And currently co-lead a project that we've had underway for going on 3 years now, called the Forum for Cooperation on AI. It is what's characterized in sort of diplomatic speak as a track 1.5 discussion involving experts, stakeholders from the private sector, from academia, from civil society, alongside current officials from a number of governments. We have Australia, Canada, European Union, Japan, Singapore, the UK, and the United States. All leaders in artificial intelligence. And over the course of those 2 years, we've now had 15 roundtables to explore issues as to how AI research and development and policy making works, what the countries involved and others are doing, and looking at how do we implement cooperation. And really, I think what the ambassador has said, I think expresses why we need cooperation in the digital world. And it is true that at this stage in the 21st century, almost all scientific research is cross-disciplinary, cross-institutional, and cross-border. And that is particularly true for artificial intelligence. One of the things we found as we looked at the patterns of research, publications, patents, other measures of what countries are doing and how they are doing it with each other, is that this is extraordinarily collaborative among all of the participants in our work. So it is important to both successful implementation of AI that is human-centric, that is ethical, that is trustworthy, that we work together. It is also important to just the success of AI and its growth, and realizing as well the opportunities. So we've looked at, how do we get there? How do we build that cooperation? And about a year ago, a progress report with the recommendations on areas of cooperation focused on regulatory alignment, on standards development, and on joint research and development. And these are the places that build bridges. So regulatory alignment, we are not going to get to complete regulatory convergence or global regime. There's too many different approaches to law, too many different cultures to do that. But we can build key mechanisms toward that. So, for example, the European Union is legislating on AI to impose certain standards, conformity assessments for AI that's deemed high risk, AI that has an impact on people's lives or on public safety. The United States, we are not going to put a regulatory regime into place anytime. But we do have the National Institute of Standards and Technology, which is developing a risk management framework. And that is something where the US and the EU are finding common ground. So there are the opportunities to develop these sorts of mechanisms. The same with standards. International standards organizations are the IEEE, the ISO, International Standards Organization, are working on aspects of AI standards. And those become bridges. And I want to talk particularly about another bridge that we've developed, because we just issued a report on the just before the COP27 conference, with recommendations on how we can collaborate internationally on AI research and development. And this is both to realize the opportunities for to create global public goods, to apply AI for in areas where it can benefit humanity, benefit the planet, and at the same time to deal with our differences on the ground. I think when you deal with issues of AI ethics, of AI governance, use cases really matter. And I think our whole sort of premise in this Forum for Cooperation project was that there are lots of principles out there. The OECD has done principles. UNESCO did principles that the ambassador contributed to. But those only get us so far. We need to figure out, how do we implement those principles on the ground? Well, doing the projects together where there's motivation to get the job done and overcome those differences provides an opportunity to do that. So we looked at a number of areas of AI for good, where there could be important opportunities to do that. At healthcare, global health, at economic measurement. Sandy Pentland has developed, who's part of this group, has developed areas of computational social science and using payments data and mobility data as measurements of human and economic activity. And we also looked at privacy enhancing technologies. Something that's more esoteric, but that has important impacts on how we move data in the world, how we enable access to data, and really helps to solve some of the challenges when it comes to health, when it comes to economic measurement. The other area that we looked at is using AI for climate change management and monitoring. Exactly the sorts of things that the ambassador was talking about. And there, our recommendations ultimately were, this is where we should focus. We used, in fact, CERN as an important model. And CERN is, yes, there is a large hadron collider that is the core of the project located in Switzerland. But that the computing for that is supported by distributed computing around the world, and the organization is supported by many institutions. Another model similar to that is the Human Genome Project. And there may be others, but we need to now build this model. So our next project is to incubate how we do this. I was in Brussels last week. I met with the official who's sponsored a project that the EU has, Destination Earth, to build what they call a digital model of the Earth. And with this kind of an effort, we can take the existing climate change models that support the work of the IPCC and take them to a different level, a whole new level of granularity, of power, and in a way that benefits the entire world, that can help solve some of the problems of data in parts of the world that that don't have the capacity on the ground to use artificial intelligence to predict weather events there, for example. So the opportunities are enormous. I think it takes these kinds of concrete bridge building opportunities to develop the international cooperation that is so essential in this area. So I look forward to the conversations. Nazli Shukri, I think you are up next. There you are. So thank you.
By coincidence, I will follow up on some of the themes that the previous speaker has defined for us, speakers have defined for us. But let me start with the immediate previous speaker on the issue of ethics and on the issue of AI. Let's remember that AI is a sense of it's a label that we use for a whole variety of very different use of algorithms and so forth. So it's not one. And at MIT, we're very sensitive to diversity of algorithms, and diversity of verification, and diversity of the authenticity. The previous speaker raised the issue of ethics. I'm not a spokesman for MIT. What I say is not the institute's position, but I will tell you that we're taking courses of ethics in AI, for AI, and ethics in general in the philosophy area, but very much so in the School of Engineering and in the computer science area. This is new for us as it is new for everybody, because ethics is traditionally a matter of philosophy, good behavior, and the philosophers have tried to define it for us. But now we're in a different era where we're talking about the pragmatics of ethics for the conduct of the development of AI in its various forms and its implementation and its utilization. And we have an audience there that is critically interested in the AI side and is kind of curious about the ethics of it. This is the undergraduates and the graduates at MIT. But this is really starting. The word algorithm has not been raised so far, and I'd like to raise it because to be realistic, we're not going to delve into trying to regulate algorithms because for most of the time, we must take, or we have taken, a higher level view of the dilemmas before us. But sooner or later, the issue of algorithms, in contrast to the issue of data, will loom forward, and we're going to have to address this in one way or another. So this is a second quick commentary. I'd like now to turn to the, or rather to place our distinguished speaker observation in a broader context of creating an age of global enlightenment. And there, my preference is to share with you three imperatives, three things that must be done along the way we're in the direction we ought to be going, which is in that new era. But there are also principles that are fundamental to everything that our distinguished guest has said earlier this afternoon. And if these resonate, it's because they come from our own experiences so far, and we can put them to very pragmatic use. There's nothing that I will say now that is new to you, but I would like to emphasize those as three imperatives. Imperatives is guidance for doing, thinking about transformation and change, or modifying current entities or practices, or creating new ways of organizing, managing, and monitoring our own existences, so to speak. The first one is most familiar to you, which is to subject our own organizations, cooperation principles or efforts, etc., to what we now do almost automatically with everything else that we're dealing with, and that is subject them to the general, is this practical sustainable with respect to meeting certain conditions, criteria, but is it sustainable over time? What would it take for us to adapt and adjust in order to make those desired cooperations or practices adaptive as we go over time? So the time frame I have in my observations is creating an age of a global enlightenment, and over a certain period of time through which we have to resolve some of the issues, most of the issues that have been addressed earlier. One is, I doubt very much that any of us would really seriously want to put aside the lenses of sustainability on the issues that we're talking about. The second imperative is courtesy of Professor Mario Molina, very distinguished scholar who passed away, was at MIT, and he's I would say single-handedly was able to get the Institute MIT to begin thinking about environmental damages and the importance of altering human behaviors, given the evidence of CO2, etc. And his favorite statement for me as an imperative is the precautionary principle. And I raise it in the context of AI as an example, or particularly because the regulators or the policymakers or social scientists, whatever it is that are not trained in the algorithms, really have a responsibility to be a little bit more careful as to where algorithms and the integrity of the algorithm or the malapplication of an algorithm, where is it in the chain of the supply chain, if you wish, in the production of the output. So far, I think it's an issue that the younger generation are very good at, but it's not an issue that is second nature to those that you consider to be leaders and decision makers and the like. So we have sustainability. We have the notion of the precautionary principle, and we have to be careful with the precautionary principle because we don't want to get to it applied to the point where there is inaction. So the question then arises: precautionary with respect to what? And what's the opportunity cost? What are the trade-offs? Does it matter how much we worry about an aspect of the issue or not worry about it at all? That I would leave with you as a second. The third imperative has been raised by a distinguished speaker this afternoon, but I'd like to put it in a different context. I will call it participation or political participation. It was raised in the context of reducing the gap between the skill levels in Africa, as an example, with the skill levels in advanced industrial countries. There's another way of thinking about this, perhaps, that might get to the same result, the same preferred outcome. And that is maybe what we're really talking about is making sure that the education system or the principles that drive education, science, engineering, computer sciences, etc., in Africa and elsewhere, don't necessarily have to take the same time and effort that it has taken the advanced industrial countries to reach where we are now, and not to really replicate their traditional, that trajectory of knowledge development. There's a remarkable opportunity now for really technology leapfrogging, and not having to go through really all the very basic, what we now consider to be basic innovations that led us to the present time. So I'm not quite sure how to design a program for leapfrogging, but I am certain that the capability of the educational systems in many countries that we would consider, quote, less developed, if that's the right phrasing, is such that getting them to the frontier very quickly would be possible. The participation side has to do with, to the extent that individuals participate in the diffusion development of a technology, is really very much related to the extent to which it is accepted in the society. And here we have a situation where the technology involved, anchored in AI, let's say, has become day-to-day material for just about everything under the sun. It's not part of the technologies that put a man on the moon or other specialized, very narrow participation of countries involved in it. This is going to be, I was going to say bread and butter, leaving aside the fact that there's a shortage of bread almost everywhere. It has more to do with the diffusion of the use of that technology without even being aware that one is involved in it as a user or as a contributor. That is going to be reaching global proportions. I guess I would say very soon. So what does this do with respect to other concerns we have? Misinformation, distortion, ransomware, theft, you name the whole thing. And why do I stress this aspect? Because I teach a course on cybersecurity with two other colleagues, one in the business school and one in media and at Sandy Pentland. So the three of us from different angles. And we teach it by way of bringing scholars or leaders from the private sector, for example, Google, to really work with us and work with the students about how should we begin framing operational ways of beginning getting rid of of the baggages that we carry that we're subjected to. Ransomware is one, and that's been discussed a little bit earlier. That I would then close by saying that this is where the precautionary principle may over time reduce the amount of effort that we put in trying to manage ransomware, et cetera, through the initial design of the system to begin with. Et voila, that's all I have to say for the time being. Thank you.
I think it's my turn. I hope you hear me well. I heard excellent speeches so far, so can I start if the screen is mine? Okay. All of you can be called by saying the floor is yours, but now I've been called as the screen is mine. So I'm honored to be part of this great team while learning, expanding, and understanding about new horizons through rich and enlightening dialogue that Governor Dukakis has been assembling with Tuan, big footprint in Boston Global Forum platform in the last decade. It's a great pleasure for me to be part of this 2 days Boston Global Forum 10th anniversary conference and listen to distinguished global enlightening speech by Ambassador Amandeep Gill. Of course, the Governor Dukakis, Ambassador Gill, congratulations for your work and passion for remaking the world toward an age of global enlightenment. Allow me to underline some thoughts about our common work so far on Manifesto that is based on the AIWS model, whose core and pillars were introduced last year in our book. Creating an age of global enlightenment vision have to be based on peace. We heard that, on dignity, equality, and sustained development. On a healthy planet on the road to fulfilling SDGs, while protecting the standards and human values that are encapsulated a long time ago in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, adopted by UN General Assembly in Paris in December 1948. And of course, the social contract for the AI age. We know that such a big and important set of goals require building borderless data infrastructure, creating opportunities for all individuals, businesses, and organizations to co-create new values, new products and services that are prosperous, highly effective, faster, smarter, as a prerequisite for connecting data infrastructure and commercial transaction and development. But from the very beginning, I think it is very important to point out that every country is welcome, but along the values and standards that are outlined in the manifesto. If a country meets the standards, it has to be welcomed and be connected to this data infrastructure in order to create an economy which every citizen is innovative. So I consider creating an education program called Global Enlightenment Education Program, GEP, for all individuals, the most important element of shared future along the vision and values that we share and promote today. I'm sure that organizations and individuals that commit to respect and apply social contract standards can participate and be supported with the Global Enlightenment Education Program, and that those people can be an organization capacitated to know how to build a home of creativity for themselves. So I think that creation and strengthening of the Global Alliance for Digital Governance, which stands out to call, connect, and coordinate between the United Nations governments in 4 founding pillars, namely US, Japan, India, and I like the coined word European Alliance, which is bigger than European Union, an alliance that is including the EU, UK, and European countries that accept and apply social contract for artificial intelligence age standards that is precondition for effective and efficient actions along our shared vision. I think that these governments, these 4 pillars, I repeat, US, Japan, India, and European Alliance, have to join the United Nations-led Artificial Intelligence International Accord and Global Digital Compact. and then implement it with the maximum resources and support given to full inclusion of developing countries. I underline again, developing countries, which are ready to share the values and standards we built so far. So after so many inequalities and gaps in between the nation states and inside the nation states, we should not allow the new inequalities creating some kind of age of global enlightenment. I call it age of global enlightenment divide, some kind of division between two poles, two parallel, confronted, exclusive, if I can say, global civilizations. Enlightened one on one side and left behind, or enlightened in waiting on another side. That is why I think that global enlightenment economy and global enlightenment economy infrastructure have to respect and recognize contributions to society, to drive people and societies with a focus not only on material and financial values, but also contribute to creating an age of global enlightenment with peace, with security, prosperity for every country. I underline every country, every people, and prevent extreme nationalism in any country that on the end ends with some kind of radicalism and ultimately terrorism. I'm among the ones that is today eager to hear more about this technology platform that is introduced in Alex Sandy Petland article that we all quote so often. I'm sure that global enlightenment economy infrastructure supported by global enlightenment polity and its knowledge platform, the Global System for Sustained Development, or GSSD, can be very instrumental in helping to solve some of the key connected societies problems of disinformation, misinformation, and the like. Then I think that global GEEI and GSSD will be good and solid platform for politics and societies of the global enlightenment age, artificial intelligence world society. And I think in this context, let me conclude by sharing a few words about global enlightenment education program, which I started with. This is intended to help remote mountain island areas, developing countries whose vulnerable population can easily learn and practice becoming innovators to master their lives in the global enlightenment age. But at the same time, I think that creating a global enlightenment economic infrastructure is an excellent platform and foundation to challenge disinformation and misinformation issues by allowing GEEI to become a solid foundation to build global enlightenment politics and society. Smarter, faster, more effective, more reliable, more sustainable, fulfilling United Nations vision of digital trust and security. And ultimately, I think that the best way to be effective in solving disinformation or fighting disinformation and misinformation and disinformation is to double down the truth, double down the truth, double down the truth. I think that GEEI and GEP, Global Enlightenment Economy Infrastructure, and Global Enlightenment Education Program, I clearly see as I call it, enlightened truth infrastructure for doubling down the truth in growing misinformation and disinformation pollution that we are witnessing on a daily basis, regardless of where we live at this small shrink planet called Earth. So I will stop in here by thanking to Mr. Cameron Carey, of course, and Nazli Kurci for their words on manifesto. I was taking some notes, and I hope I won't have to ask for copyright when I quote you sometimes. I'm looking forward to listen, of course, Francesca Lapenta, and at the same time, I'm being very eager to hear some thoughts from distinguished colleagues, Joan Donovan, on misinformation and disinformation, as well as Randall Davis on knowledge-based systems in artificial intelligence for an age of global environment. So those are the topics that are in the core of our shared mission, remaking the world toward an age of global environment, global enlightenment. And of course, I want to thank you all for being together. And this is really an honor and privilege to share thoughts with such a good friends and people. And I think we've been, to do it at the time, creating some kind of alliance of like-minded people and entities. And I'm very glad to be part of that. Thank you very much.
All right. So first of all, I want to express my deep gratitude to the Boston Global Forum for organizing these and many other initiatives. I had the pleasure of meeting the Boston Global Forum about a year and a half ago, and kindred spirits, what brought us together was clearly the mission of trying to contribute to an urgent global debate. There was clearly the shared ethos of trying to bring people together in a conversation. They wanted to really improve social justice. They wanted to work for the benefit of humanity and for the common good. And I feel that one of the most amazing qualities of the initiative, initiated by Governor Michael Dukakis, Professor Peterson, and directed by Tuan, was that of selecting people that share this mission. So it was profoundly moving for me to listen to the presenters before me, because I think what they created was an incredibly clear map of a mission that we share. I heard words about social innovation. I heard words about social justice. There was also an incredibly nuanced definition of all the complexities and all the elements that we are facing, the challenges and opportunities of artificial intelligence. And I was particularly intrigued by the use of the term global enlightenment that was, let's say, suggested by the Boston Global Forum, because I mean, to honor the location where we are, I'm a professor that has been teaching for 15 years a course that is called DRAW, Digital Rights and Wrongs. And the course was basically looking, it was a form of forecast and future scenario analysis. I gave my students the task of, they formed groups and they all had to look at technologies that were probably going to impact humanity in the next 5, 10 to 20 years. This is an exercise that I've done for the past 15 years. And what I was telling them was that what technologies do you think they're going to shape our future in the immediate future, in the next 5 years, or in the more long-term future? And I gave them a task, and the task was, do this technology make us better humans? This was the question I was always asking them. You have to ask yourself, does this technology make us better humans? So that is something that will intrigue me when I read the mission of this creating an age of global enlightenment, because what I realized is that basically the mission was that of positioning again humanity at the center of technological innovation. Technological innovation should be there to solve human problems. The main function of innovation and technology is not the development of technology for itself, but it needs to have a purpose. It needs to be designed to solve problems. I don't understand the critique that is very many times posed when we say that we want to regulate innovation. Right, one of the constant critique for the government for any effort to try to regulate innovation is that it's going to stifle innovation. You say whenever you create regulation, you're going to stifle innovation. That is a false statement. Innovation is a very generous act of creativity. You pose a question, you pose a problem, and you will have very many talented people that will solve that problem. So for me, ethical guidance, ethical guidelines, it's showing the purpose of technological innovation, reminding people that the ultimate aim of technology is that of solving human problems. Now, what makes artificial intelligence very different? I think that artificial intelligence is very different. I think you had incredibly nuanced kind of definitions and discussions about artificial intelligence. Some that I want to point out that I particularly care about is the fact that we don't have an actual meaningful definition of artificial intelligence. I totally agree that there is many forms of artificial intelligence, and then to put all of them together is not really serving a purpose. I also do. I lost track now. Yeah, the definition of artificial intelligence is very many times obscure. Many times we create confusion between machine learning and artificial intelligence. Machine learning and artificial intelligence, they're two very different domains. And when we talk about artificial intelligence, I'm profoundly convinced that the risks associated with artificial intelligence are incredible, actually incredible, so much as the potential. So there's only three concepts that I want to focus and build up on the conversations that were elaborated before. One is that of complexity theory. Complexity theory is something that is very dear to me, and it's basically, as a sociologist and person that is studying social interactions, I'm very fascinated by the moment in history where one specific innovation, one specific intervention can shape entirely humanity. When I'm trying to describe to students the chilling effects of social technical innovations, I always struggled to find examples. One of the examples I normally gave is the definition of time. I mean, the definition of time is kind of interesting. We use 24 hours, and these 24 hours are totally articulate in our lives. We are kind of totally articulating every daily activities around this definition of time, but basically nobody really remembers why we are using those 24 hours framework. How was that standard created? Why do we use 24 hours? And what is interesting is that definitional standards has these long-lasting effects. And that's probably one of the most important conversations that is happening today, is the realization that decisions that are made today in the definition of technologies and development of technologies will have very long consequences. When people ask about the shift towards regulation and governmentality in technology and why we should move towards that, I would normally say the reason why we have to do it is because we have acquired experience and we are aware of the consequences, the long-term consequences that one engagement and one form of innovation, one form of technology might have in the long term. For example, the definition and the choice of using oil, fossil fuels as a form of energy, it was something that was hotly debated in the 70s because the consequences of that use of that specific technology were in sight, but were disregarded. We cannot repeat the same mistakes with artificial intelligence. So there is the field that we have to come together on a general definition. Another thing that is probably emerging is the awareness of social justice. Now, the ambassador Jill was talking about the two innovation models that have existed. One of the dominant models has been competition. This form of competition was very often military. Now, during the First and Second World War, and after the Second World War, a very specific model for technological leadership was designed. Basically, whoever was at the front of technological innovation was seen as in a position of leadership. It was governing many of the other systemic use of the technology. The consequences have been incredibly powerful, have been incredibly positive. But as the ambassador has noted, they were not equally distributed. If you look at the evolution, the 4 stages of the Industrial Revolution, one of the biggest consequences of that innovation was social injustice and social inequality. We haven't all taken advantage of these technologies. We haven't all taken advantage of the innovations and technology itself. Now, COP27 basically put at the forefront, put on our front agenda, climate justice, the idea of engaging with the technology in a way that is socially just for all society. Now, one of the things that happens with the technological innovation is that the gap between the people that have adopted those technologies and the ones that have not has been increasing. It's 2022 and there's 1 billion people on the planet that doesn't have electricity. It's 2022 and 50% of the people doesn't have constant access to the internet, for example. This creates an increasing gap between nations, but there's also an increasing gap within nations, because we have seen that as we move from the first to the second to the third and now into the fourth Industrial Revolution. Also, the social gap within societies is changing. The amount of wealth that's moving from society at large to fewer individuals is been increasing from one passage to the other. Now, the real danger of artificial intelligence is that this trend might continue. Now, how do we solve all these problems? The social justice element, the social gap, the enormous risks, the chilling effects of a technology that might have long-term consequences like artificial intelligence. So one of these elements is governance, but another element is that of what I call technology, science, and data diplomacy. Now, technology, science, and data diplomacy are very different in the definition is currently used from interaction and collaboration and scientific collaborations. The world has been working on scientific collaboration and technological collaborations. Many people have been working together. The definition itself is what is important. When you talk about technology and diplomacy, diplomacy is really addressing the social construct, different interpretations, the ways in which technology is elaborated, internalized by different societies that have different needs, different social economic structures, and that require different technologies. Now, one of the real potentials of artificial intelligence is its diversity. The fact that we specifically said there's going to be different forms of artificial intelligence, it means that this diversity might be able to address different problems. I've been talking with lawyers in Africa and in the global south in general, and they say that the problems that we're posing to technology, they're not very many times relevant to them. One of the biggest evolutions that is possible, one of the biggest potential of artificial intelligence would be that of developing a micro-macro approach to resolution of these technological problems. Different social contexts, different problems, different technological solutions. Technology diplomacy and science diplomacy, the way I interpret it, are a different form of interaction, a different form of negotiations, in which all different parts of the world can talk together about the existing technologies, the problems they have to face, and the way in which these problems can be solved. Talking about climate justice and social justice, I think that the countries that have led technological innovation, that have taken the biggest share of the resources, of the limited of resources that have on the planet, have a responsibility to develop these diverse and adapted technological innovations. Once again, artificial intelligence has the potential of this diversity. So three things that for me are important to conclude. One, I think is the focus on technological technology, science, and data diplomacy. One other is complexity. Complexity theory has been told by our speakers is one of the biggest issues today. Artificial intelligence can be and should be designed to be human-centric, and by human-centric and human-centered, what we mean is that they should augment our ability to interact with complex data in ways that are relevant to our ethics and moral compass. And the other one is that of a definition of artificial intelligence that embodies humanist perspective, where we define what global enlightenment is and what is the position of humanity and the role of technology compared to the evolution of humanity. Thank you.
Francesco, thank you. Next, we're going to hear about a dimension that has been briefly talked about, but not in depth, the economy. And we've got collaborators here. Jeff Saviano from EY, and who's a science fellow at MIT, is going to be with us physically. And then a longtime contributor to the Boston Global Forum, Sandy Pentland from MIT. He's on sabbatical this year, inexplicably decided to spend it at Stanford, but he's going to join us as well. So I don't know how you're going to divide the time here, but I'll let you do the work.
So I think the idea is I was going to say a few words, and then Jeff was going to contribute the real content. So I'm very proud to be part of the AI World Manifesto for Enlightened Society, Global Enlightenment. Sorry, I can't be there. I want to start by sort of talking about how you actually begin delivering these things to everybody, making it available in the world, and more of sort of the technical side of things. And I like to begin this by changing people's mindset and quoting Chairman for Life Xi out of China. He is quoted as saying, data is now a primary means of production along with labor and capital. If you think about that, that's amazing. The primary voice for Marxism, which is all about labor and capital and the tension between them, is saying now that there's a third contender, data. It's not just breadcrumbs or something on the side. It's really something as important, according to him, as labor or capital. And they have been executing on that. Another thing that he says is that they that have the data have the initiative. It's true. And I think that one of the sort of substrates, one of the important aspects of global enlightenment has to be infrastructure, digital infrastructure, data infrastructure, AI infrastructure that's available to the entire world, that is built on the sort of ethical framework that we would like to see. And I'm worried about that because I know quite a bit about what different countries are doing and different companies are doing. And I'll just give you a quick tale. I remember being at a meeting in Nairobi where the government was trying to establish a financial system that was much more inclusive than the one that they currently have. And they had selected several companies to compete for this. And all of those companies were Chinese. There were no Western companies. And that was a good decision, but by one perspective, by them, because the technologies, the frameworks these people were proposing were qualitatively better than you can find in the West. That's a really sad thing. And the thing that we need to do is not have a Cold War or anything like that. We need to compete. We need to have systems that we can offer that are as effective, inexpensive, controllable as anything that the Chinese can sell. And they need to be available everywhere. And so as a consequence, we worked with Ernst & Young, with the World Bank, with several different countries, including India, importantly, and Australia, and Switzerland, to build open source software that has a lot of the sort of ethical principles built in, uses the very sort of state-of-the-art control of data for local advantage so that the people can keep control of their data. And what we hope to do is to make this open source software available to governments first, so that their internal systems can be brought up to snuff. And something that Jeff always likes to remind me is that the sort of best estimate of tax avoidance from cross-national border trade is about $1 trillion a year. If there were modern systems on both sides of the border for every country, there would be $1 trillion more to pay for the Sustainable Development Goals. But that requires making things available to all of these nations. And that's the goal. That's what we're up to. And I'll turn it over to Jeff to talk a little bit about the framework and the intentions and the sorts of things that we would like to do in this domain. So thank you.
Thank you, Sandy. Always appreciate your remarks and really appreciate being part of Sandy's Connection Science Lab. My name is Jeff Saviano. I'm a tax partner at EY, and also I teach innovation technology in a future of law class for at the Boston University School of Law. We need more innovative lawyers in the world, so I'm trying my part. Thank you very much, Professor Patterson. Thank you, Tuan. What an honor to be here today. Congratulations, Ambassador Gill, on receiving the World Society Award. And I realize we have not talked enough about taxes today. And I know that's why you came, to think about how taxation influences the discussions. And I've been so thankful working with Sandy and Tuan, the Boston Global Forum, along with the World Bank, on thinking about the role of innovative technology and fair taxation and what that means. I'm also quite concerned. I come here today a bit concerned, and Ambassador Gill had mentioned the incredible collapse of just a few weeks ago, billions of dollars that seems to have evaporated overnight. And I'm concerned because I believe that government plays quite an important role in promoting and advancing innovative technology. But I'm concerned that we're about to go through a period of regulation that frankly would be appropriate to protect citizen investors and to protect others. But I believe that there is an important role that taxation can play in all of this as well. There are other roles that government plays in promoting these technologies. So I wanted to use my time to briefly discuss the 5 roles of government. So the first, of course, have to start with government as a regulator, and this idea of multi-stakeholderism that Ambassador Gill talked about, that there are many examples of where we're seeing regulation happening, and it's about to get more intense. We saw just an example last month. The OECD issued the crypto asset reporting framework, and it's about 100 pages of regulations, and that will not be outdone by, in the US, we're about to receive another 100 pages of regulations that will come and will affect and will regulate the space. We think it is important, but it is not the only role, and I believe that it has to be balanced. So I'm a bit concerned that we may go through a period of perhaps over-regulation, and what are we worried about there? Worried about perhaps there may be some stifling of innovation. How do we get that balance right to regulate where appropriate, but also don't over-regulate so we could impose too much of a burden? Those pirates and buccaneers that Ambassador Gill mentioned, they're stealing our tax dollars, and there's a lot more that we can and we should do to protect citizen investors and to protect citizens across many dimensions. So that's the first role, and it is, I don't want to minimize it, the importance of it. The second is to incentivize, and I think it is an important role that government has to incentivize the development of these technologies and the opportunity to align taxation to that. As President Reagan said, if you want more of something, subsidize it. If you want less of something, tax it. And we have plenty of examples of an overlay of the tax code with innovative technology. One of the most important things that happened in the proliferation of the internet was in 1998 when President Clinton signed the Internet Tax Freedom Act, and it prohibited the taxation of accessing the internet. It was meant to be temporary, and we were so thankful in 2016 when President Obama made that permanent. But that allowed the internet to prosper tax-free. And isn't that what we need in order to promote these innovative technologies? That was an important act. There are many, many other incentives to think about patent boxes to limit the taxation of income from intellectual property. The experiment in British Columbia imposing taxation on carbon. If you want less of something, tax it. They tax carbon and people consumed less fossil fuels. We can debate the politics of it, but it worked. If you're worried about your children drinking too much of those sugary beverages, well, tax it. They'll probably drink less of it. So the opportunity for taxation to influence innovative technology and actually incentivize it, I think, is quite important. So that's the second. The third is that government has a role in convening, and this has come up quite a bit today, but the opportunity for government as the grand convener in many cases. These are ecosystem problems, and they need to be solved with unique ecosystems coming together. The diversity of ecosystems. We've mentioned a few times digital public infrastructure and the important work of the UN and the Digital Public Goods Alliance. Great examples of digital public goods system, DHIS2, is a healthcare record system that's in place in over 70 countries in the world. 30% of the world's population lives in countries where DHIS2 is in place. And it's an amazing system. It's an open public system that's providing approaches and providing new open source approach to solving problems. We need more digital public infrastructure to solve these problems. So that's the third of the role of government as a convener. The fourth is, I think it's quite important for governments to consume this technology as well. Don't just leave it to the private sector to incubate and consume, but there's plenty of examples of leading governments that are consuming these very technologies, especially in the world of these new emerging Web3 technologies. How can government consume and influence and lead in the world by consuming and incubating? I think an important role that government can play there as well. And one other example of that, we can look to India, look to the Aadhaar system and the incredible effort that has occurred there to develop a new digital identity system that is a foundation for many public and private sector technology applications. Nothing happens without valid identity. And in India, it's happening. And it was the result of the convening of multiple stakeholders to solve that problem. And then lastly, somebody has to pay for all this. And government, of course, will play a role there as well. But there are many, many other opportunities to finance these systems. Large philanthropies are establishing technology funds and governments and multilaterals. I don't think we have a money problem. I think we have a coordination and a governance problem. But government certainly has a role to play in financing some of it. So ask you to think about these 5 elements as we as a society are dealing with the aftermath of this incredible collapse of a few weeks ago that I think will have a correction in the markets. So the opportunity to not just to regulate, but to incentivize and to convene and to consume and to finance innovative technology, I think is important as well. Professor Patterson and Tuan, thank you again for opportunity to provide some remarks today. And Ambassador Gill, again, congratulations on the award. Thank you.
Jeff and Sandy, thank you. Next is my wonderful colleague from the Shorenstein Center, Joan Donovan. While Joan is coming up here, she's going to help us think about misinformation and disinformation. While she's coming up, I want to put a plug in for her recently published book, Meme Wars. If you want to know about why the online discourse is killing us as a democracy, the book says it all. Joe.
Thank you so much. Thank you. It's an incredible honor to be here, and thank you to everybody that's arranged the talks, and Ambassador Gill, congratulations on this award. I'm a bit of an outsider to this field, so I just want to let you know that I might come at this from a bit of a different perspective because I'm a sociologist. I'm not a technologist per se. But I think a lot about technology, and I think about how people use technology in bad ways, right? And so not just, oh, are we going to get more malware? I'm thinking about how are other global stakeholders going to be using this technology to create situations of competition, amplify divisions, push polarization, so that they can leverage essentially technology in order to disrupt society, disrupt governance. And as I was listening and thinking about some of the work that I've done in the past on white supremacist use of DNA ancestry tests, I did this study when I was at UCLA's Institute for Society and Genetics, and not a lot of people thought, well, DNA ancestry tests, these are great tools. These are, they teach you about your lineage. But what white supremacists were doing productively with that tool was creating boundaries. They were talking about, revisioning the one drop rule. They were talking about how they were going to reconcile this push for diversity within genomics with their own ideas of what it meant to be white, and how they were going to use that science in order to create more division. And as I think about how the Human Genome Project came together and then was subsequently critiqued, much of the critique of the Human Genome Project was that it left behind stakeholders, particularly Indigenous people and then LGBTQ people in this race to get at this data. And so in some ways, Indigenous communities had to rise up and say nothing about us without us, right? And it was a big critique of the Human Genome Project because they were sourcing data and blood samples and DNA samples from Indigenous communities without really making any promises about what to give back. And from queer people and trans people, they were sourcing DNA to try to find this elusive gay gene or this trans gene. And of course, it didn't really work. And we see and we're confronted by something similar with facial recognition technology right now, where facial recognition technology is saying, well, we can find people's emotional states. Maybe we can find a gay face. Maybe we can find partisan faces. Maybe we can reveal something about someone's political interests by analyzing their faces. And worse, we can identify criminal faces. So it's this reimmersion of phrenology in some ways. And when it comes to misinformation and disinformation, we classically talk about AI as something that exacerbates or amplifies differences, already pre-existing differences. It speeds up the news, it accelerates scale, so that if you're using a botnet or you're manipulating algorithms, you're able to get your disinformation out to larger publics very quickly. We don't think about the kind of media manipulation and disinformation that would be enabled by AI. The creation of disinformation about vulnerable and marginalized populations by creating this quasi-scientific knowledge about, gay faces or criminal faces, for instance. And so when we do our research on media manipulation and disinformation, of course, we're looking at the touch points of hate, harassment, and incitement that tend to be the products of disinformation campaigns. But we also have to really care about how the technology is being designed, how the technology is being deployed, and of course, who has access to that technology, and then who is able to govern it. And I've been thinking a lot about this notion of Web3, because I think what we're moving from is the problem of user-generated content to a new problem of AI-generated content. I just want to wrap up on a couple major points about deepfakes, cheapfakes, and these new emerging technologies like DALL-E, GPT-3, as well as Galactica, which was Meta's version of a large language model that was recalled last week. So if we're thinking about AI that subverts society, subverts our culture, undermines our politics, makes it more difficult for us to resolve our wedge issues, then deepfakes, which are essentially AI-generated images or video or audio that take someone's likeness and make it seem as if they have said something. Most applications of deepfakes right now are pornography. And it's not pornography just in the sense of, oh, can I take, some Hollywood starlet's likeness and create a simulated scene and then make money off of it. It's also used in blackmail. of people. And there's been some legislation looking at deep fakes in that way. We also have cheap fakes, which is like just the use of editing tools, no AI involved, but quickly speeding up a video, slowing down a video, changing the context of a video. This is something that Russia does a lot in the context of trying to get world world leaders to look into what they claim are human rights abuses by Ukrainian forces. And so these deepfakes and cheapfakes are already out there, primarily being used in ways that are amplifying already existing divisions. But I think that there's something really important that we need to understand about this next generation of read fakes, or these large language models, which people within these companies like Google have been fired for investigating. I'm thinking here about the work of the Distributed AI Research Institute, led by Timnit Gerbeau, as well as some of the work of Joy Ballin-Weenie, who has been at MIT for some time talking about these large language models. Galactica was recently released by Meta, and within a few days it was pulled back because it was being used to generate fake scientific papers. And the idea was that a few scholars who know a lot about a certain issue just put in prompts into the Galactica language model and then saw what was spit back from this language model based on stuff they already know about. And the big critique was, these sound like scientific papers and they're not. And some of the results are biased because we know what's built into the language model is a product of our culture. And so Meta decided to take the large language model off the net. DALL-E 2 has been criticized for making images and in some instances stealing the copyright or elements of copyright from other artists in order to create these AI generated images. Where that's most apparent is when you look up something like ketchup and everything looks like a bottle of Heinz, right? And so you see that the branding and whatnot is already baked into the technology itself. It can't imagine ketchup without Heinz, right? So where do we go if the way this is headed are towards more computer generated or AI generated content in Web3? Is that we have to think about this practically, and we have to think about it from the standpoint, I believe, of governance. And we had talked a little bit earlier about truth. Truth is a human process, right? The problem with Galactica is it doesn't know what's true. There's no algorithm that knows what's true. Truth is a process that we get to through verification, methodology. So you can't just insist on truth from these systems. Even though they are called intelligent, they're in many respects not capable of telling the difference between what is true and false. And it reminds me of the way in which X-rays were accepted in medical practice. So not many people think about the history of the X-ray, but in legal cases, the problem is that you would go to work, you'd break a bone, and then you'd have no way to say my bone is really broken. So the X-ray system was this really unique way in which you could look inside the body. But legal experts and judges asked, well, is this really seeing inside the body? How do we know this? And how can we then get experts to come and testify that this is a picture of inside the body and this bone break isn't just a remnant of the production process? So we had to create an entire expert system that worked around the technology, that worked with our truth-telling institutions. We need more people in this phase of looking at AI that can talk to journalists, that can talk to technologists, that can take that knowledge and repackage it and represent it so that governments can understand the true risks. And unfortunately, what I've learned being at the Kennedy School for a little while now, and is that there's no governance without transparency and accountability. It's just not possible. And there's no transparency and accountability without independence in research and the ability to audit these systems. And as a researcher, I have been very proud of the fact that I've been able to do all of my research on media manipulation, misinformation, without a dime from any of these companies and without any data proprietarily given to me as a researcher, because that independence is the most important thing I have when it comes time to stand. I've learned this and I have tested my own knowledge and we have devised our own methods, and we can say with confidence that we know what we collected and what we know is true. And so I think that one of the ways to get towards this auditing and governance that we are going to need is to think more about adversarial methods, really about what is it going to take to get students to try to break these systems, to be able to learn from these large language models. And then secondly, we're going to need to bring in abusability studies, not just usability studies. We're really going to have momentum that goes beyond ethics, because ethics are what you do when you don't have a policy. It's sort of like, and it's very individually tailored. But if we have a study and a method for understanding abusability in these systems, we will be able to move forward, I believe, together towards a public interest internet. Thank you.
Sorry.
Joan, thank you. Next to bring Ukraine into the conversation, Lana Cook, Director of Strategic Initiatives at MIT. Ukraine and more, I think, is probably the way I should introduce you.
Hello, and thank you. So today I'm here to talk about tech for global enlightenment education, so kind of bridging some earlier comments, and in particular around the aid and response to the Ukraine. And so first, I just want to say thank you for inviting me to join here at the Boston Global Forum and in today's gathering. So in one way or another, whether by violence or by weather, we will all be impacted by displacement. Someday, if we don't heal ourselves and this planet, our species will be displaced from this earth and home. And so in an act of displacement, how do you start over? How do you rebuild a home, a career, a life? It begins, in my view, by learning. Learning how to survive, how to cope, how to be in a new environment, learning to meet new people, learning to navigate new institutions, bureaucracies, processes, and laws. It is a time of learning new languages, new skills, new knowledges, and jobs. To be displaced means to be a learner in need of resources, guidance, and recognition. It is a time of immense learning, often in a time of intense survival. Yet we can often think of education as not an immediate need for refugees and the displaced, with humanitarian aid very necessarily directed towards shelter, healthcare, food. And yet, when we understand displacement as a period of intense learning, imagine what pivotal role education could play in shaping and shifting the outcomes of displaced communities. At MIT, we seek to open such learning. We seek to open up education to all, wherever they are in geography, income, or preparation. We open up learning resources and knowledge, courses and certificates, pathways to credentials and degrees. We have been doing this over the last 20 years since the start of MIT OpenCourseware, MITx, edX, MicroMasters, boot camps, and in pioneering research on the learning sciences and learning engineering. And starting in 2018, in response to the Syrian refugee crisis, we opened up learning to talented and motivated refugees and displaced people, offering a pathway to learning, livelihood, and hope through MIT's certificate in computer and data science. Started by MIT professor Admir Masek, a Bosnian refugee who knew firsthand the impact of that status. The MIT Refugee Action Hub, or REACT for short, developed an agile model for upskilling individuals to enter into the tech field, an area where labor demands far exceed available talent, and an industry where there's greater flexibility in traditional degrees and credentials required. MIT React tested this model through 4 global cohorts, first anchored in Amman, Jordan, and then moving online, now bringing over 200 learners and alumni from over 30 countries together in the last 5 years. Our learners are those underserved by traditional tertiary education. Refugees, migrants, women, first-generation college students. They are the ones on the margins, those talented that could slip through the cracks. Those who, with the right opportunities, could be the emerging social impact tech leaders of tomorrow that I hear call for in this forum. We are building global hubs to activate local networks of universities, companies, NGOs to nurture and spark opportunities for learners where they are while they're in this global online program. And in 2023, we're expanding the certificate in computer and data science to new underserved learners around the world under a more expansive umbrella called MIT Nurturing Emerging Talent, or NET. We like our acronyms at MIT. So in NET's cohort-based program, refugees, migrants, and underserved and historically marginalized communities, including locals from nations around the world, live together. They learn from each other as diverse communities of near peers, gaining from each other's prior knowledge and wisdom. Our program has 4 key pillars: academics, skills, employment, and networks. So learners come together in study sessions while they progress through their academics, a series of MITx online courses in computational thinking, programming, data science, AI and machine learning, entrepreneurship and innovation, ethics and social impact. Inspired by one of our faculty advisors, Professor Cynthia Brazil of the Media Lab and MIT Open Learning, and her initiative, Responsible AI for Social Empowerment and Education, RAISE for short. They grow their communication and collaboration skills as they work on data science and software development projects on GitHub, unpacking the ethics and implications of the technologies that they are creating. They learn and laugh and heal together in our virtual community spaces and workshops, disparate in ethnicity, gender, religion, and politics, but united in the shared pursuit of knowledge and the opportunity for greater prosperity. And they apply their learning in MIT's Mens et Manus spirit through apprenticeships, internships, and capstones, and connect with one-on-one mentors from a wide network of MIT alumni and friends, integrating them back into the fabric of society. Coming out of the 12-month program, our learners rise to new careers in tech, employed as software developers, data scientists, and business analysts, with some graduates seeing up to a 50% increase in salary earnings, and others for entering their first paid job after years of chronic underemployment. Embedding our online program within this global hub model, our global hubs that present are Jordan, Uganda, Colombia, Uruguay, the United States, and the Afghan diaspora. We connect these MIT-trained talent to local tech labor markets and entrepreneurial ecosystems, growing innovation and offering the opportunity for localization, for translation, for adaptation, as well as vibrant exchange between the local hubs, MIT, and each other, seeking to activate the very kinds of global digital cooperations that you all have described here today. This is why we see this model as central to MIT's Ukraine response, not only in up and reskilling Ukrainians displaced from home and career, but in the longer term reconstruction and revitalization of Ukraine. With my key collaborator, Roy Maderki of the Poland-India's Business Council, we are building a Ukraine-Poland hub to support these cohorts of Ukrainian learners. In January 2023, we'll launch the call for applications for our 5th cohort. We seek philanthropic support to open up the program free of personal cost and to reach as many talented and motivated young people as is eager to learn with us. We seek academic, industry, and NGO partners to help serve our learners' holistic needs. And we seek government allies to develop inclusive digital, educational, labor, and protection policies that can pave the way for these learners' success and enable us to grow models like these in new locations around the world. In that, we learn from each other's resiliency. Young men and women from the Ukraine to Afghanistan learn alongside those whose active displacement was many years ago. Syrians and Eritreans, Congolese and Venezuelans have shared lessons about what it means to rebuild and reclaim their lives. The age of global enlightenment is a time where we can learn to honor those shared lessons about what rebuilding, reconstruction, reimagining can look like in each of our lives, individually, as a nation, as a society. Digitally connected global learning models like these present us with opportunities. The opportunity for the power of the collective to solve problems and advance humanity. In net, learners must do experiential learning projects, with many choosing to join groups. And so one year, 2 young women, an Eritrean in South Africa and a Colombian, bonded as peer data scientists, studying a challenge common to them both, or scarcity. Suggesting just a moment of the kinds of opportunity of the digital cooperation we could see here. The opportunity to bring people from divided nations and ethnicities together through this shared pursuit of education, of that something greater, to improve their lives and that of their communities. This cannot be done with Pollyanna naivete, but rather a real dedication to building the generative conditions of compassionate education spaces. We really lean into learning from our differences, developing the capacities of mutual respect, personal inquiry, and systems awareness. Learning that whether we're in the classroom, the workplace, the metaverse, the refugee settlement, or government office, how we show up matters. Though we believe this model holds great promise, let us not be utopic in our thinking, but rather understand the systemic challenges as opportunities for necessary policy change. Significant challenges remain for the young people who are on this journey, even in that first and last mile, with many facing, on one end, limited access to electricity, internet, and hardware, as we've heard today, in this growing digital divide. And in the last mile, restrictive labor policies, labyrinthine hiring processes, and discrimination and harassment in the workplace. In OECD countries, only 56% of refugees are unemployed, or 56% of refugees are unemployed. And only 6% of refugees are enrolled in higher education. UNHCR's ambitious goal to reach 15 by 2030, while ambitious feels yet a dismal target, we think of the potential that is lost, with these young people drawn instead perhaps to radicalization while facing those limbos of displacement. Instead, could we offer flexible yet focused educational pathways, leveraging the digital technologies we've discussed here today, to empower these young people to identify problems and to solve them, leveraging the collective intelligence that this great age of technology has brought us. I'd like to leave us here with a charge. In between stimulus and response, there's a choice. In our response to the war in the Ukraine, the crises in Afghanistan, Ethiopia, Bangladesh, and so many other locations around the world, we have a choice to continue to choose the quick fixes, the continuous cycles of humanitarian dependency, or to develop the conditions for a more systemic response, one of empowerment through education and collaborative pathways to collective prosperity. In this moment, we need to choose to bring dignity and agency and voice to those displaced and historically marginalized around the world. We must honor their resiliency to see refugees not as dependents, but as beacons of strength, whose wisdom wrought out of the crucible of their intense learning has so much to offer our nations. Let us choose to come together as those displaced and those with a welcoming home, to rebuild our global communities and the technologies that serve them back better, with prosperity anchored in compassion and collective empowerment. This is the age of global enlightenment that open learning can make possible. Thank you.
Next, we'll hear from Randy Davis of MIT's Electrical Engineering and Computer Science Department, helping us to think about how knowledge-based systems kind of fit into the discussion today. Randy?
Fine, Clark.
Chuan, thank you very much for the invitation, and my congratulations as well to Ambassador Gill. I'd like to touch briefly on two topics this afternoon. A, the potential impact of knowledge-based systems in enabling an age of global enlightenment. And second, a clear-eyed view of AI ethics. For anyone not familiar with the term knowledge-based systems, the first question is frequently to ask whether anyone has ever suggested an ignorance-based system. In fact, the term points us toward a rather fundamental and profound question. What's the source of expertise? What's the source of expertise in people? Consider someone who's very good at a cognitive task. It's playing chess, doing medical diagnosis, designing a house, or any other challenging task. Why are they good at what they do? Do they think faster than the rest of us? Do they think differently from the rest of us? Knowledge-based systems are founded on the idea that, to a large extent, expertise is based on knowledge. Simply put, people are good at a task because they know a lot about it. They know a lot of facts, and they know a lot of ways to reason with those facts. Here are two current examples that might be interesting. If you have a fever, a cough, shortness of breath, and fatigue, there's a chance you may be infected with COVID-19. Now you know one more piece of knowledge about medicine. Here's another one. If you have experienced a sudden loss of taste or smell, then there's a stronger chance you may be infected with COVID-19. That's another one. And notice one of them is relatively weak evidence, one of them is slightly stronger evidence. What it takes to be a good diagnostician is having lots of those kinds of inferences at your beck and call. Notice that the knowledge is task specific. Being an expert auto mechanic doesn't make you an expert in medical diagnosis. I would hate to find out my MD used to be an auto mechanic. Expertise typically arises from a large body of knowledge that's specialized to the field. But sometimes a modest body of knowledge will do. Bank of America has a small application, a small knowledge-based system that offers advice about spending and savings patterns. It doesn't know very much, but as happens often, this is a situation where even a modest amount of knowledge delivered at the right time in the right place can be very useful. The standard analogy is to electric motors. They vary in size from huge ones in electric locomotives to the tiny ones in wristwatches. The important point is that they deliver the right amount of power at the right place at the right time. So it is with these systems. They can deliver the right amount of knowledge and experience when and where it's needed. Even the concept of knowledge-based systems has important implications. It sets a profoundly optimistic and democratic tone for education. If expertise is truly knowledge-based, and expertise is accessible to anyone willing to accumulate the relevant knowledge. That's a profoundly democratic and inclusive message. Second, a word about AI and ethics. Let's consider a somewhat time-worn example. If an autonomous car encounters a situation where it has only two options, it could run over 3 children or 3 elderly adults, what should it do? I'm not going to take a vote. I'll just let you think about that for a minute. A lot of ink has been spilled on this, and in my opinion, one of the reasons is that it's been spilled uselessly, is it has nothing to do with AI. Put a human being in that car behind the wheel, and the situation is exactly the same. The reason it's a tough problem is because we don't know what to do either. Putting a human being in the situation changes nothing. I believe that's true for almost all the issues that have been labeled AI ethical questions. They have nothing essential to do with AI. Simple substitution of a person for the machine typically leaves the ethical AI problem unchanged. It's still an ethical problem. It just has nothing to do with AI. Why does this matter? Because if we can get AI out of the way, the core ethical questions emerge. They become clearer, and we can focus on them, which is what we ought to be doing. Are there questions that are inherently AI and ethics as opposed to software and ethics, technology and ethics? One good source of guidance on this that I found comes from the Markkula Center for Applied Ethics at Santa Clara University. They pointed out that some technologies have produced genuinely new ethical questions. For genetic engineering and respirator technology as 2 examples. For genetic engineering, when is it okay to change a genome, considering that the consequences may be passed on indefinitely? For respirators that are capable of keeping the body alive, even when the brain has sustained massive damage, when is it ethically permissible to turn off the respirator? Before the new technology arrived, we didn't have to answer these questions. Now we do, and guidelines have evolved. For AI, the closest thing to a novel ethical question, it seems to me, is likely to be the role of autonomy. Is it ever okay to turn over an important decision to an algorithm? Sure, we do it all the time. Has anyone here driven or ridden in a car newer than 2004? Most of you, I suspect. There's a computer in that car that's running an algorithm that decides when the wheels are slipping. That's how your anti-lock brakes work. That algorithm, by the way, is biased, but that's a discussion for another time. You're risking your life to an algorithm in a computer in your car. Has anyone taken a long plane trip? Maybe 6 hours or more. There are computers on board that fly the plane when it's on autopilot, and especially in really lousy weather, they may land it as well. They rely on very complex algorithms. Now, autonomy of this sort makes possible new questions. It may create new questions, but even here, I think we can make progress by asking 3 questions. How well do we understand the problem? How well do we understand the problem? What are the consequences of the decision? And how reliably can we encode our understanding in software? The answers to these questions, I think, guide our ethical use of autonomy. You rely on your thermostat. It's automized. It controls the heat in your house because if it gets too warm, you turn it down. It's not a big deal. Oh, and by the way, we understand that problem pretty well. We understand controllers. So we're willing to turn over the task to an autonomous system. Now, I haven't addressed, of course, a wide range of other ethical questions, like ensuring that AI is used for beneficial ends, but that's a question that ought to guide our use of any technology. And it's at the level of using technology, not AI. Let me summarize my comments. A substantial amount of human expertise is knowledge-based. This seemingly simple observation leaves us with an optimistic and inclusive view of the human acquisition of expertise. And second, most questions labeled as AI ethics, I think, can be seen far more clearly if we chop off the AI part of that label. That, in turn, will help us address the core issues. Thank you.
Randy, thank you. Mike Dukakis is available, and I think we have to fire him in. Hello.
Hello, dear Mike. Yes, yes, and I hope you well now. And in the room, every people look forward and expect your voice and your word now. Thank you so much, Governor. Yeah.
Okay, can I speak now?
Yes.
Okay. Let me first apologize for not being able to be with you today. How do I explain this? Kitty and I both are having serious problems, and in my case, it involves a very bad leg. I can't walk with it, and it has to do with my inability to work through this issue with my left leg. So I apologize deeply. But first, I want to say thank you to all of you who have been part of this, especially to the ambassador who we honor, and to say to him and to all of you that I'm much encouraged by what has happened over the past few weeks internationally, and want very much to see if we can't lead an effort to bring the world together, to bring the international community together, to see if we can avoid another Cold War and come together around important common issues. I think that is much more possible now as a result of the midterm elections. And I look forward, I hope, with a much better leg in the next few weeks to working with all of you to see if we can't build that future. But my thanks to all of you, a special thank you to the ambassador for being with us. And I just, again, I have to apologize for the fact that I was practically unable to walk this morning, and really had a very difficult time getting around. So I hope the next time we meet, I'll be in better shape and the world will be in better shape. And thank you again for all you've done. A special thanks to so many of the folks who have been part of this effort with us. And let's make this a better world, a more peaceful world, and a more constructive world. I think we can do that now. And I'm very much encouraged by the progress we're making, and into a lot of foolishness that's been taking place internationally. And look forward, without question, to our working together to build a strong and peaceful world, which will bring people together and put us all on the same track to a better and a more positive future. My special thanks, obviously, to Tuan and the work that he's done, and to Tom, his involvement, and so many of the people that have worked with us. And I look forward to seeing you again as I gradually recover from this very, very serious injury, which unfortunately hit me just about a week ago. Tuan, thank you for everything, and thanks to everybody who has made this day possible. Really appreciate it.
Dear Mike, thank you so much. And say best regard to Kitty, and I hope you will recover soon. It might be a leader. Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. we have some time, and I'm sure that many of the ideas that have been expressed have created some thoughts, maybe even questions in your head about that you'd like to ask the participants. There's lots to think about here. I mean, some words keep coming up over and over again, like cooperation and ethics. And it leads me to think about incentives and when they start to align and when they're not very well aligned. And we see some alignment at the level of nations. Cam, you were talking about the US and EU increasingly getting together on many of these issues. I see a little bit less alignment when it comes to firms as to whether they want to be fully part of what we would like them to be. Listening to Joan, I think some users have an incentive that's quite disaligned with what everyone in the room would like to see happening in this space. So there's, I think, a lot more we could talk about, and I do thank you all for coming, but I do want to open the floor for discussion for at least a few minutes. So if you have questions or if you have observations, if you have questions for any of the participants or your independent observations on things that have been discussed here, let's just kind of open up the room. Yeah, please.
Thank you, this has been terrific. This is so much of this. I know I've heard Alex and Kathleen mention this topic before, but it comes down to like data. Who owns data, right? Who owns their data? And then if everyone owns or has the right to own their data, whether it's in this country or it's African, then they have the right to choose what happens to the data, right? So like if I have an account at Chase Manhattan Bank, it's my information. If Chase lets it out, if the Chase it's their problem, right? But I mean, and then the portability of data and the use of it. That anybody could comment on that. But next, I'm James. Terrific.
So there's been a lot of work done on this, and what it comes down to is essentially that when you click in to your email or you sign up for social media, there are all of these terms of services that have been operating for years that say that the data is theirs. Your posts are theirs, your images are theirs. So sometimes your images will be repurposed in advertising to people in your social network. And so our data, where we first, I think, made a very big mistake in governance of the internet was not getting a handle on data protections for consumers. And now all of these systems that are AI systems dependent upon big data take for granted that everybody's data is going to continuously be available to them for free. That's what has made Google the size of the company that it is today, is because our data only really makes sense. Digital data in particular makes sense in relationship to others, whereas your personal banking data might be worth purchasing in disaggregated pieces. Digital data from the net really only makes sense when you have lots of it. And unfortunately, these systems, social media that we've come to depend on is almost like social or public infrastructure when it really doesn't work that way, has this entire hidden economy about data and surveillance. One of the things that I think governments should really look into is data privacy, especially if your product is about email. Why does the email servicer need to know my gender? Why do they need to know my birth date, right? And so there could be rules about minimal viable products that say disclose what kind of data you have to collect in order to produce this technology and serve the consumer. But for right now, they collect so much more. And this is the last point I'll make. The markup just released a study saying that certain tax Services online, including H&R Block, have been selling data to social media companies. And so we don't know often, even when we're using services that are supposed to protect our privacy, we don't really know if they are, because there are very few rules that govern the reuse and reselling of data on these markets.
The example of what Joan was talking about, the examples continue to multiply to get more and more egregious. We've all got one of these with a flashlight on it. Did you know that some implementations of the flashlight functionality monitor your location? Now, why do they need to do that? They need to be brighter some places than others? No, it's because they can get it. And there's a problem with that. So I think the notion of defining the minimally necessary information is a good idea. Enforcing it, that would be another issue. We'll probably have to rely on the marketplace, but not a bad idea. Second comment, this issue about collecting information online. I'm always struck by the staggering difference in scale between me and Google. My data is worth about that much, but collect a few million of us, and all of a sudden, it's worth a lot of money. That's an inherent asymmetry. It's going to be difficult to get around. So we need to deal with that. On the brighter side of things, at least in the academic world, openness has taken several leaps forward. It's hard to publish a paper in a first-line journal these days, at least in science and technology, without supplying access to your data, your model, and your results. So that if you claim you've built a machine learning model that does X, Y, and Z, you have to provide all the raw material that will allow someone else to exactly reproduce what you did, or they won't take it. And boy, does that have an influence on making sure you cross your T's and dot your I's. So it's one small step in a good direction, at least in that audience.
Okay, I'm gonna name the Ambassador. You gotta make sure to turn off the flash up.
Corey, tell me, Corey, tell me.
So I agree with much of what has been said about the critiques of the existing ways that we collect and use and allow the use of data. And I think Joan is absolutely right that sort of an original sin here in the way that we have allowed terms and conditions of use to define that. I don't agree with the premise of the question that, when you transact business with, I can't remember if it was Chase City, but that is your data. I think we have to arrive at a point that recognizes that information has value. We do value that in our society. We have a First Amendment that is designed to enable free flow of information, and that has social benefits, and that information contributes to the store of knowledge that allows for research, allows us to expand frontiers of human knowledge. But we have to do that in ways that are equitable and trustworthy. So all the examples that you had about collection of location data or information that is entirely irrelevant to the context in which you transact business, that paradigm, we have to make that trustworthy. So we need to sort of change the paradigm in which we think about information. Information, there are shared interests. So you transact business with Chase. Chase has some interest in that information for their record keeping, for their business information. But that doesn't mean they can do anything that they want with it. And that is the way that we've historically treated this. And we have in law the so-called third-party doctrine. So once you share the information with the bank, Supreme Court ruled on this in the law enforcement context, it's not yours anymore. That's wrong. There need to be enduring protected interests. And, I hope we can get there. And I led the Obama administration's work on consumer privacy, tried to address this 10 years ago now. We are still trying to get there, as Bill on the floor of the House, that potentially would put boundaries around what companies can do with the data that's collected and limit it to the context of the transaction. But I won't go into the politics of that one.
You mind, if I may interrupt, do you mind sharing what the roadblock was?
Well, right now, the roadblock is California, which has its law. And the agency and sponsors of that law, want to keep the power to enforce that law rather than have a consistent national law that would preempt state laws in areas that are covered by the federal law. So they have got Nancy Pelosi to say, no, hold it. You have to, we need to do something to carve out California.
Or get them to play along.
Way?
Or get them to include whatever their concerns are in the bill.
That is politically tough to do. Because this is a bipartisan bill and took a grand bargain to get there. And I think you lose to that and you lose the legislation. And I don't think we'll do any better in a future Congress. Happy to have that discussion later on.
So this is a really interesting case, right? Because basically there's profound differences in the ways in which private data are treated in Europe and in the US. And that are part of big negotiations. Actually, the negotiations failed a couple of years ago. An agreement wasn't found. But in Europe, we have the General Data Protection Regulation, which basically says that private data are yours and you can control them, and you can transport them, and you can ask two companies to cancel them. So there's a very different regimen for private data that is developing in Europe, and that is becoming a little bit of a kind of a lighthouse for other countries that are imitating, California being one that is very much kind of adopting the General Data Protection Regulation. It's a very complicated matter, but one thing that I want to suggest is data trusts. Now, if you think about the scientific value of data, so collective value and individual value, those are sometimes very separate. I mean, your data can be valuable to institutions, so your citizen, you participate to a city. The city might have an advantage in knowing if you're having problems parking somewhere, or there's a whole number of genuine reasons why your personal data might be relevant to collective action. It doesn't mean that those data need to be personalized. They can be anonymized. The same scientific value can be kept. Now, a way of doing it is to have an intermediary in any kind of company should use a data trust. A data trust is someone that acts on your data, that they belong to you, and they tell the company what is the agreement upon which those data should be used for. Now, think, for example, that you want to contribute to scientific research individually because you have a specific condition and you want to share that information. You are in charge and you tell to the company how you want your data to be monetized. You can say they can be used, they can be personalized, or they can be anonymized. You are in control of the data. Now, this does two things. First of all, it maintains economic advantage for the companies that are treating the data. They're simply subjected to some decisions that you make with a company. Then trust it, think of it as a bank, right? The bank can do something with your money, but it needs to be legal and you need to be informed, right? Now, the problem with what companies do with your data is that they are legal because you signed a contract, but you're not informed because they use your data in ways that you don't know. That transparency, you should be part of the contract. If you're treating with my data, you need to tell me what you do with my data. And the only way you can do it is by having enough trust that basically is controlling, based on your opinions, what the companies are doing. So you maintain the scientific advantage because, for example, let's say there's a disaster. In that case, you say, well, I want people to have my data. I want them to know where I am, what I'm doing, so that there can be some disaster relief or action, basically. No? So there are technological solutions to maintain the collective value of personal data while preserving the privacy of your individual data. So it's not true that the companies cannot monetize it, but there's different ways of doing it. And the different thing is for scientific knowledge, and I'm very much for open data. Now, scientific knowledge is really important. Let me give you an example. It's a sentence that I constantly use. Is open data are sustainable data and green data. Now, an incredible amount of scientific data is produced by research in the university. Millions are spent by this public investments to generate scientific data. Research that is published by scholars. No? But what happens is that after those data are used, 80% of medical data are not reused. They're only used for one purpose, for one paper, and then never used again. To me, that is waste, right? So the fact that you can decide that those data to be open so that it can be used and create an advantage and create a more powerful scientific discovery, and that you can decide that they can be publicly shared. So in Europe, they created a system that is called FAIR. Basically, all data that are produced by projects that are financed publicly, they need to be eventually open and accessible. But the way in which they do it is that you are in control at different stages. The life cycle that the ambassador was talking about, the life cycle of data is that data don't need to be private all the time. They can be private at the very beginning, kept private for a certain amount of time, and then be open later. And you are in control of the way in which the data are used during their life cycle. So if I'm conducting research, which is under IP, it's something that I am researching that is innovative, it doesn't mean I can control it during the certain stage, and I can open and I can decide who to open it to, and then eventually those data can go through a different life cycle, eventually becoming open access. Now, what I'm trying to say is there's different technical solutions to maintain the balance between privacy and public scientific discovery and collective action. And there are the technical tools to do it. What is perhaps missing is the will to do it, because naturally in this transaction, there's a shift of power, and the way in which companies have access to this data will have greater costs. But we have seen the Netflix model, we have seen the ways in which IP protected personal data can be monetized in different ways, no?
So Francisco, we have to have you be the last word. We have sort of a contract with you that will get you out when the conference is scheduled to end, which is 6, but we've just been informed that our contract with the Loeb House actually ended about 5:30. So, we're going to have to vacate the room, but I do want to thank the speakers, but as well, everyone who came. I think, again, I think there were so many ideas floating in the air here that this late conference is going to have legs, even though we have to leave the room. So thank you very much. And Ambassador Gill, congratulations.
Today is a very special day because to honor Ambassador Gill and also close with Thanksgiving. All of you came here with enthusiasm and great to contribution on content. We are highly appreciative and grateful, not only for this, but 10 years so far, Boston Global Forum grow and have today is from your contribution, your brand, your time and dedication. We highly appreciate from my heart, from our heart, from Governor Michael Dukakis' heart also. And today we start and discuss with the manifesto AIWS action to create the global enlightenment. So we send you already, and that for next year plan, we do very much for action and combine between high level dialogue with government, with top corporation, with our distributed thinkers, and with events, mass event and distinguished event. And we hope all of us today will together with us accompanying with Boston Global Forum for next years, many years. And from my heart, for 10 years, we highly appreciate with our great contributor today and for 10 years. Thank you so much and see you in next year. Of course, I hope many people can back tomorrow and also next year. Excellent plan. Thank you so much.
Oh, I did. Apple on this? It's a good one.